The unexpected delivery. Jacob sat in his small, dimly lit apartment on a distant mining colony known as Orion 5. The place was lonely and quiet, the kind of quiet that made you notice the hum of the air filters and the occasional creak of the old walls. Life on Orion 5 wasn't glamorous, but Jacob had grown used to it. A robotic engineer by trade, he spent most of his days fixing mining bots and machinery. Lately, though, the silence of his evenings had started to get to him. To ease the loneliness, Jacob had ordered a robotic pet. The catalog described it as an intelligent, low-maintenance companion. Perfect, he thought. It would arrive soon, and he was looking forward to some company, even if it was just a machine. The delivery arrived on a rainy evening. The sound of raindrops tapping against the metal roof filled the room as Jacob opened his door. A crate, about the size of a small fridge, sat on his doorstep. It was marked with glowing blue symbols he didn't recognize. Strange, he thought, but dismissed it as a new design by the company. Using a crowbar, Jacob pried open the crate. The lid hissed as it released a puff of cold vapor. Inside, he expected to see a sleek robotic companion. Instead, he froze. Lying inside the crate was a girl. No, not a human girl. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft silver hue that seemed to glow in the dim light. She was wrapped in a glowing fabric that pulsed gently, almost like it was alive. Her hair was long and pale blue, cascading around her delicate face. Jacob's heart raced as he stepped back, unsure if he was dreaming or if someone had sent him an alien by mistake. Before he could process what was happening, a small device at the bottom of the crate lit up. A holographic message projected into the air. The message was short but cryptic. Handle with care. She is the last of her kind. The words hung in the air, and Jacob felt a shiver run down his spine. Who sent this? Why was she here? Questions swirled in his mind, but the only sound in the room was the gentle hum of the crate and the soft breathing of the alien girl. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open. They were the most striking eyes Jacob had ever seen, large and luminous, shifting colors like a sunrise. She looked at him, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. Jacob froze, unsure of what to do. "Oh, hi," he said awkwardly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. The girl didn't respond with words. Instead, a soft, melodic voice echoed in his mind. "Where am I?" Jacob stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a chair. Did you just talk in my head?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I did," the voice replied. Her expression softened, and she tried to sit up, wincing as she moved. "Please, don't be afraid. I need your help." Jacob wasn't sure if he should be afraid or amazed. "Help? I don't even know what's going on. Who are you? Why are you here?" The girl hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "My name is Lyra. I was sent here because you are the only one who can protect me." "Protect you? From what?" Jacob asked, his voice rising. This was supposed to be a simple evening. Unpack a robot pet, maybe watch a movie. Now there was an alien girl in his apartment, talking in his head and asking for protection. It felt like a bad dream. Before Lyra could answer, the lights in the apartment flickered. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, and Jacob's communication console beeped urgently. He rushed over and saw a message from the colony authorities. "All citizens are advised to stay indoors. Suspicious activity detected in Sector 7. Remain alert." Sector 7 was just a few blocks away. Jacob glanced at the crate and then back at Lyra. "Is this about you?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "They're coming for me. I don't have much time." Jacob felt a surge of panic. "Who's coming? Why would they come here?" Lyra's voice in his mind grew quieter, almost sad. "It's complicated. They want something only I have. Please, I'll explain everything, but first, we have to stay hidden." Jacob stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't know this girl, this alien, but something about her made him believe she was telling the truth. Maybe it was the fear in her glowing eyes, or the desperation in her voice. Whatever it was, he couldn't just throw her out. "Okay," he said finally, running a hand through his hair. "You can stay, but you better start explaining. And if they find us, I'm going to need a lot more than just words." Lyra nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Jacob. You won't regret this." Jacob wasn't so sure. As the rain continued to fall outside and the lights flickered again, he had a feeling his quiet life on Orion 5 was about to get a lot more complicated. Stranger in his home. Jacob sat on the edge of his couch, nervously watching Lyra as she explored his small apartment. She moved gracefully, her shimmering skin catching the dim light. Every step she took was silent, almost like she floated rather than walked. She stopped in front of a shelf, holding a few outdated tech manuals and an old holographic photo of Earth. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, this time out loud, not in his head. Jacob blinked, startled. "Earth? No. I mean, I grew up there, but I haven't been back in years. Mining colonies pay better." He hesitated. "And you?" Lyra turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and curiosity. "I'm from a place you wouldn't find on any of your maps. It was called Elora. It's gone now." Jacob felt a pang of guilt for asking. "I'm sorry." She gave a small, bittersweet smile. "It's not your fault. But you might wish I had stayed gone." Her voice carried a weight that made Jacob uneasy. Lyra moved to the window and peeked through the reinforced glass. Outside, rain streaked down in thin sheets, obscuring the view of the distant mining rigs. The faint glow of patrol drones scanned the streets, their beams cutting through the dark like knives. Lyra pulled back quickly and turned to Jacob. "They'll be looking for me soon," she said. Jacob frowned. "Who are they? And why would they come after someone like you?" Lyra hesitated, then placed her hand on the crate she had arrived in. The glowing fabric inside pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. "It's not me they're after. It's this." Jacob tilted his head. "The blanket." Lyra shook her head. "It's not a blanket. It's called Illuma Veil. My people developed it to harness energy in ways no other species could. It can heal, protect, even enhance technology. To the wrong hands, it's a weapon of unimaginable power." Jacob crossed his arms. "And these wrong hands, who are we talking about?" Lyra looked him directly in the eyes. "The Consortium." At that name, Jacob's stomach twisted. The Consortium was a galaxy-wide corporate empire, infamous for exploiting resources and crushing anyone who stood in their way. If they were after her, it explained the patrol drones and the encrypted files in the crate. "They wiped out your planet for that thing?" Jacob asked, gesturing toward the Luma Veil. "They didn't just wipe out Elora," Lyra said quietly. "They enslaved my people. I was smuggled away by a small resistance group. They sent me here because, well, you were the only one left who might help." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Me? Why me?" Lyra hesitated again, as if weighing her words carefully. "The Resistance chose you because of your engineering background. They believe you can help me decode the files in the crate. They contain the last plans my people made, plans to fight back. Without them, there's no hope of stopping the Consortium." Jacob leaned back, rubbing his temples. "So let me get this straight. You're an alien princess or something, running from the galaxy's most dangerous corporation, carrying a piece of tech they'd kill for, and somehow it's my job to save you." Lyra frowned. "I never said I was a princess." "That's your takeaway." Jacob shot back, exasperated. Before Lyra could reply, the apartment's communication console beeped loudly. A grainy message appeared on the screen, displaying the stern face of a Consortium officer. "Attention, citizens of Orion 5. A fugitive has been spotted in your sector. Harboring this individual will be considered an act of treason. If you see anything suspicious, report it immediately. Patrols are authorized to search all residences. Jacob felt his chest tighten. Treason. Great. Now, I'm a criminal just for having you here. Lyra's expression darkened. If they find me, it won't matter. They won't leave any witnesses. Comforting, Jacob muttered. The console beeped again, this time with a message from the colony's security grid. A red warning flashed. Unauthorized drones detected near your residence. Jacob jumped to his feet. They're here. Lyra stepped toward him, her voice urgent. We have to leave now. If they scan the apartment, they'll know I'm here. Jacob shook his head. Leave? We'll never make it past the patrols. They'll be scanning for life forms. Lyra's lips pressed into a determined line. Not if I do this. Before Jacob could ask what she meant, she placed her hand on the Luma veil. The fabric lit up, and a wave of energy rippled through the room. Jacob felt a strange warmth pass over him, and then suddenly, everything went quiet. The hum of the apartment systems, the rain outside. It was as if the world had gone on mute. Lyra swayed slightly but steadied herself. We're cloaked. They can't detect us for now, but it won't last long. We need to get to the coordinates in the crate. Jacob blinked. Coordinates? What coordinates? Lyra pointed to the console. The files I brought. They contain a map to a safe place, an old Elloren outpost hidden on this colony. We can figure out our next move there. Jacob hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay put and wait for the patrols to pass. But one look at Lyra, standing there with her glowing skin and determined eyes, convinced him otherwise. If she was willing to risk everything, maybe he could too. All right, he said, grabbing a backpack and stuffing it with tools and supplies. But if we get caught, you'd better have a plan B. Lyra smiled faintly. You'll find I'm full of surprises. As the two slipped out into the rainy night, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, predictable life had just become the most dangerous adventure of his existence. The chase begins. The rain poured harder as Jacob and Lyra crept through the dark, narrow alleys of Orion 5. The glow of patrol drones swept across the colony streets like searchlights, their mechanical whirring echoing in the wet silence. Jacob kept his head low, gripping his backpack tightly. Lyra walked beside him, her steps so light she barely made a sound. The coordinates she had uploaded to his wrist console pointed toward Sector 12, an abandoned area of the colony that had been shut down years ago after a series of mining accidents. Jacob's unease grew with each step. Sector 12 was off-limits for a reason. Collapsing structures, toxic air pockets, and unstable ground. Now it seemed like the only place they could hide. Are you sure about this? Jacob whispered, glancing at Lyra. She nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the shadows. The outpost is there. My people built it underground. The consortium doesn't know about it, at least, not yet. Jacob frowned. And you think we'll be safe there? Lyra hesitated. Safe? No, but we'll have a chance. Before Jacob could respond, a sharp beam of light sliced through the darkness behind them. A patrol drone had turned the corner and was heading straight for them, its sensors glowing red. Jacob's heart raced as he grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her into a side alley. Run, he hissed. The two sprinted through the rain-slicked streets, their feet splashing through puddles. The drone emitted a loud mechanical screech, signaling the others. Within seconds, more drones appeared, their lights converging in pursuit. This isn't good, Jacob shouted as they ducked under a crumbling archway. He glanced at Lyra, who was breathing heavily, but still moving with an almost unnatural grace. They're tracking my energy signature, Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. I can suppress it, but only for a short time. Do it, Jacob urged. We need every second we can get. Lyra slowed for a moment, placing her hand against a metal wall. Her eyes glowed brighter, and a faint pulse of light rippled outward. The drones hesitated, their sensors flickering as if confused. Lyra swayed slightly but caught herself, motioning for Jacob to keep moving. "This way," she said, leading him through a hidden passage behind a row of abandoned storage units. As they moved deeper into the colony's outskirts, the lights and sounds of the drones faded, but Jacob's nerves remained on edge. The passage opened into a vast, open expanse, Sector 12. The air smelled stale, and the ground was littered with debris. Towering structures loomed above them, their metal frames rusted and jagged like the skeletons of long-dead giants. "This place is a death trap," Jacob muttered, eyeing a collapsed building in the distance. "It's also the only place they won't search right away," Lyra said. She pointed to a barely visible hatch hidden beneath a pile of rubble. "There. That's the entrance." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't look like it's been used in years." "It hasn't," Lyra replied, "but it will work." As they approached the hatch, Jacob noticed strange markings etched into the metal. They glowed faintly as Lyra ran her fingers over them, muttering something in a language he couldn't understand. With a soft hiss, the hatch unlocked and swung open, revealing a dark tunnel leading underground. "After you," Jacob said, peering into the darkness. "Not that I'm scared of the creepy alien basement or anything." Lyra smirked faintly. "Stay close." The tunnel was narrow and damp, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. Jacob activated the flashlight on his wrist console, illuminating the path ahead. The walls were lined with more glowing markings, their patterns intricate and otherworldly. "What are these?" he asked, pointing to the symbols. "Guides," Lyra said. "They'll lead us to the main chamber." "And what's in the main chamber?" Jacob pressed. "Hopefully, answers," she replied, her tone cryptic. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the tunnel sloping deeper and deeper into the ground. Finally, they'd reached a massive door, its surface engraved with the same glowing symbols. Lyra placed her hand on the center, and the door began to hum. Slowly, it slid open, revealing a cavernous room filled with alien technology. Jacob's jaw dropped. The chamber was like nothing he had ever seen. Holographic screens floated in midair, displaying streams of alien data. Strange machines, pulsing with faint light, lined the walls. In the center of the room was a circular platform surrounded by what looked like control panels. "This is it," Lyra said softly, walking toward the platform. She placed the Luma veil on it, and the room seemed to come alive. The holographic screens shifted, displaying maps, diagrams, and what appeared to be blueprints. Jacob stepped closer, his eyes scanning the data. "What is all this?" "Plans," Lyra said, her voice filled with both hope and sadness. "The last plans my people made to fight the consortium." Jacob's gaze locked onto a schematic that looked eerily familiar. "Wait a second. This is a power grid. And this is mining equipment. Your people were building weapons out of colony tech." Lyra nodded. "We adapted to survive. And now, we need your help to finish what they started." Jacob felt a weight settle on his chest. He had come here to escape responsibility, to live a quiet life fixing machines. Now he was being asked to join a fight he didn't even understand. Before he could respond, a loud rumble echoed through the chamber. The tunnel behind them shook violently, and dust rained down from the ceiling. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice tense. Jacob's pulse quickened. "What do we do now?" Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with determination. "We fight." The hidden sanctuary. The vibrations from the tunnel behind them grew stronger, sending small rocks tumbling from the ceiling. Jacob's heart pounded as he glanced at Lyra, who was calmly examining the holographic screens despite the chaos closing in on them. Her glowing eyes scanned the alien text with an intensity that made him wonder if she even noticed the danger. "Oh, Lyra," Jacob said, gesturing toward the trembling walls. "In case you missed it, we're about to get buried alive. Maybe speed things up." Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "The chamber is shielded. They'll have to break through several layers before they can reach us. We have time." "Define time," Jacob muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ignoring him, Lyra moved to a console embedded in the floor. She pressed her hand against it, and the holographic displays shifted again, zooming in on a map of the colony. Red markers lit up, showing the positions of consortium patrols converging on Sector 12. "They're using high-frequency scanners to track the Luma Veil," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "We can't stay here long. The shield won't hold forever." "Great," Jacob said, throwing his hands up. "So why are we just standing around? What are you even looking for?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up another set of holograms, this time displaying a series of blueprints. Jacob's eyes widened as he recognized some of the designs. "These are colony systems," he said, stepping closer. "Power grids, ventilation systems, even mining drills. Why do you have these?" Lyra finally looked at him. "My people hid caches of technology within colonies like this one. If we can access them, we'll have the tools we need to fight back." Jacob frowned. "You're telling me your people built secret bunkers filled with alien tech and just left them here?" "It was a contingency plan," Lyra explained. "If the consortium ever discovered Alora, we needed a way to strike back. These cages were meant to arm and protect resistance cells." Jacob shook his head, his mind racing. "And you think there's one of these caches on Orion 5? "I don't think," Lyra said, pointing to a blinking marker on the map. "I know." The marker was in the heart of Sector 12, beneath a collapsed mining facility. Jacob's stomach sank. That area was notorious for unstable ground and toxic gas leaks. Going there was practically a death sentence. "You're kidding," he said. "That place is a graveyard." "It's also our only chance," Lyra replied, her tone unyielding. "With the cache, we can disable their scanners and escape the colony. Without it, we won't survive." Before Jacob could argue further, the chamber shook violently, and a deafening crack echoed through the air. The shield was failing. Lyra grabbed the Luma Veil and stuffed it into Jacob's backpack. "We need to move." Jacob followed her toward another hatch on the far side of the chamber. It opened into a narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with the same glowing markings as the main room. "This will take us closer to the cache," Lyra said, stepping inside. "Stay close." Jacob hesitated, glancing back at the chamber as more rocks fell from the ceiling. He felt a pang of guilt leaving all that technology behind, but Lyra was already moving, and he didn't have time to dwell on it. With a resigned sigh, he followed her into the tunnel. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the ground. The tunnel was long and winding, illuminated only by the faint glow of Lyra's skin and the occasional flicker of his wrist console. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rumble of collapsing stone. As they walked, Jacob couldn't help but ask, "Why did your people choose me? Out of all the engineers in the galaxy, why send you to some guy fixing mining bots in the middle of nowhere?" Lyra glanced at him, her expression softening. "It wasn't random. Your work on energy optimization caught their attention. The way you re-engineered colony power grids to run more efficiently. It's the kind of ingenuity we need to adapt our technology for human systems." Jacob blinked, surprised. "That was just a side project. I didn't think anyone noticed." "They did," Lyra said simply. "And now, I'm trusting you to help me finish what my people started." Before Jacob could respond, they reached the end of the tunnel. A heavy metal door blocked their path, its surface covered in more alien markings. Lyra placed her hand on the door, and it glowed briefly before sliding open with a hiss. The room beyond was vast and eerily quiet. It was filled with rows of strange, egg-shaped containers, each glowing faintly. Jacob stepped closer to one, peering through the translucent surface. Inside was a piece of alien machinery, its design unlike anything he'd ever seen. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice almost reverent. "The cache." Jacob felt a mix of awe and dread. What do we do now? Lyra approached a central console and began typing on its glowing interface. We activate it. The cache will release a burst of energy that will disable the consortium's scanners. It'll give us enough time to escape. Jacob's stomach twisted. And what happens if they find us before that? Lyra looked at him, her eyes steady. Then we fight. As she worked, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was only just beginning. The consortium wouldn't stop, and neither, it seemed, would Lyra. Whatever they were getting into, it was bigger than either of them. And there was no turning back now. A desperate plan. The cache chamber hummed with energy as the alien technology began to stir. Lyra worked swiftly at the central console, her hands moving with precision over glowing keys that shifted and changed under her touch. Around them, the egg-shaped containers began to emit soft pulses of light, casting eerie shadows on the metallic walls. Jacob stood nearby, his heart pounding as he tried to process everything. "You're sure this will work?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. Lyra didn't look up. "It has to. The energy surge from the cache will disrupt their scanners long enough for us to escape. But it's not just about escaping, Jacob." She paused and turned to him, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "This is our chance to fight back. If we can access the weapons here, we can cripple the consortium's operations on Orion 5 and give the colonies a fighting chance." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. Fight back. "Lyra, I'm not a soldier. I'm just a guy who fixes machines. You're asking me to take on an empire. I'm asking you to believe in something bigger than yourself," Lyra said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You've already taken a risk by helping me. This is just the next step." Before Jacob could respond, the room shook violently. The sound of explosions echoed through the tunnels, and the hum of the cache wavered. Lyra turned back to the console, her movements more frantic. "They're here," she said, her voice tight. "They're trying to breach the outer defenses." Jacob's chest tightened. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough," Lyra replied. "The activation sequence for the cache takes time. If they reach us before it's finished, we won't survive." Jacob scanned the room, his mind racing. He wasn't a fighter, but he knew how to improvise. His eyes landed on a row of alien tools near one of the containers. Among them was something that looked like a handheld plasma cutter. He grabbed it, testing its weight. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, glancing at him. "Buying us time," Jacob said, gripping the plasma cutter tightly. "Keep working. I'll hold them off as long as I can." Lyra's expression softened, a mix of gratitude and concern. "Be careful, Jacob." He nodded, his throat dry, and headed toward the tunnel entrance. The closer he got, the louder the sounds of the breach became. Mechanical screeches, the grinding of metal, and the unmistakable thud of heavy footsteps. The consortium's enforcers were coming. Jacob positioned himself near the entrance, his heart hammering. He peeked out and saw them, heavily armed drones and humanoid soldiers in sleek black armor. Their helmets glowed with the same red light as the patrol drones, and their weapons looked like they could vaporize a building. "Great," Jacob muttered under his breath. "Just great." He adjusted the plasma cutter, hoping it would do more than slice through metal. As the first drone stepped into view, Jacob aimed and fired. A beam of bright energy shot out, striking the drone square in its sensor array. The machine sparked and collapsed, but the noise drew the attention of the others. "Over here," one of the soldiers shouted, pointing toward Jacob. "Fantastic," Jacob grumbled, ducking behind a pile of rubble as energy bolts whizzed past him. He fired again, taking out another drone, but the soldiers were closing in fast. Suddenly, a surge of light illuminated the tunnel. Jacob turned to see Lyra standing at the entrance to the cache chamber, her hands glowing with energy. She raised them, and a shimmering barrier formed between them and the advancing soldiers. "Jacob, fall back," she shouted. He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back toward her, and as soon as he was inside the barrier, she closed it completely. The soldiers fired at it, but their weapons had no effect. Lyra staggered slightly, her face pale. "This won't hold forever," she said, her voice strained. "The cache is almost ready, but I need your help to stabilize the power flow." Jacob rushed to her side, adrenaline propelling him. She pointed to a series of glowing conduits connected to the central console. "The energy levels are fluctuating. You need to manually adjust the flow. There, on that panel." Jacob nodded and moved to the panel, his hands working quickly. The alien interface was unlike anything he'd ever seen, but the logic behind it was oddly intuitive. He adjusted the controls, watching as the lights on the conduit steadied. "It's working," Lyra called out, her voice filled with relief. Suddenly, the barrier wavered. Lyra winced, clutching her side. The glow around her hands flickered. "What's wrong?" Jacob asked, rushing to her. "The strain. It's too much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Luma Veil can boost the cache output, but it's taking too much from me." Jacob felt a surge of panic. "What happens if you keep pushing yourself?" "I'll be fine," Lyra said, though her weak smile told him otherwise. "Just focus on the cache." Jacob hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stop her. But the sound of the soldiers pounding against the barrier reminded him they didn't have a choice. He turned back to the console, his hands moving faster as the cache systems roared to life. Finally, the room was bathed in a brilliant light. The cache emitted a pulse of energy that rippled outward, shaking the ground and cutting off the sound of the soldiers. Jacob turned to Lyra, who collapsed to her knees, her glow dimming. "Lyra," he shouted, rushing to her side. She looked up at him, her eyes half closed. "The scanners are down, but they'll regroup. We have to move." Jacob nodded, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She leaned on him for support, her voice weak but determined. "I can. Let's finish this." As they exited the chamber and made their way toward the next set of tunnels, Jacob couldn't help but wonder if they were truly one step ahead, or if the consortium was just waiting for the right moment to strike again. The final stand. The tunnel leading out of the cache chamber was cold and damp, the walls vibrating faintly as distant explosions echoed through the underground. Jacob supported Lyra as they stumbled forward, her weight pressing heavily against him. Her glow had dimmed to a faint shimmer, and her breaths were shallow and uneven. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Jacob said, his voice laced with concern. "You need to rest." Lyra shook her head weakly. "We don't have time. They'll recover from the disruption soon, and when they do, they'll come back stronger." Jacob gritted his teeth. She was right. The pulse from the cache had only bought them time, not a permanent solution. He needed to think of something fast. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a large underground cavern. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and metal. In the center of the cavern was an abandoned mining rig, its skeletal structure rusted and covered in debris. The rig's central core hummed faintly, a remnant of the power it once harnessed. "This place looks like it's been dead for decades," Jacob muttered, scanning the cavern. Lyra's eyes flicked toward the rig, her expression thoughtful. "It might be old, but it's still functional. We can use it." Jacob frowned. "Use it how?" Lyra pushed herself off him, her movements slow but deliberate. "The mining rig has a core capable of generating massive amounts of energy. If we overload it, we can create an EMP strong enough to disable every piece of consortium tech on this colony." Jacob stared at her, his mind racing. "An EMP that strong would knock out everything, including the colony's life support systems. You're talking about shutting down an entire mining operation." "It's the only way," Lyra said, her tone firm. "The consortium will keep coming until they find me, or worse, they'll use this colony as a base to expand their reach. We can't let that happen." Jacob's stomach churned. He wasn't a fan of the consortium, but sabotaging the colony wasn't a decision he could take lightly. Thousands of workers depended on its systems for survival. He looked at Lyra, her glowing eyes filled with resolve despite her weakened state. "Are you sure there's no other way?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "If there was another way, I'd take it. But sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. I need you to trust me, Jacob." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'm not leaving the colony to freeze and suffocate." Lyra nodded. "We'll need to reroute the power from the core to create a focused pulse. It won't take out the entire grid, but it'll be enough to stop the consortium." Jacob's engineering instincts kicked in. He climbed onto the rig's platform, his hands moving quickly to access the control panel. Dust and grime coated the interface, but he managed to bring the system online. Lights flickered, and the rig groaned as dormant machinery whirred to life. "This thing's ancient," Jacob muttered. "I'm amazed it still works." Lyra joined him, her steps unsteady but determined. "My people designed it to last. It was built with alien technology integrated into human systems. That's why the consortium can't detect it. It's invisible to their scanners." Jacob glanced at her, impressed. "Your people really thought of everything, didn't they?" "We tried," she said softly. "But even the best plans can't account for everything." As they worked together, the cavern trembled again. Jacob's wrist console beeped, showing a proximity alert. The consortium was closing in. "They're here," he said, his voice tense. Lyra's glow brightened slightly, her resolve unwavering. "Keep working. I'll hold them off." Jacob grabbed her arm. "You're in no condition to fight." "I don't have a choice," she said, pulling away. "This is my fight, Jacob. Finish the pulse. I'll buy you time." Before he could argue, she turned and moved toward the entrance of the cavern. Jacob watched her go, his chest tightening. He had no idea how she planned to stop an army in her condition, but he had to trust her. He turned back to the rig, his hands flying over the controls. The system groaned and hissed as he rerouted power to the core, the readings on his console spiking dangerously. Come on," he muttered, sweat dripping down his face. Suddenly, a deafening explosion shook the cavern. Jacob glanced over his shoulder and saw Lyra standing in the entrance, her hands raised. A shimmering barrier of light blocked the advancing soldiers and drones, but the strain was evident on her face. "Jacob," she shouted. "Hurry. I'm working on it." He yelled back, his fingers moving frantically. The rig's core began to glow, its hum rising to a deafening pitch. The entire cavern seemed to vibrate with the energy building inside it. Jacob adjusted the controls, setting the pulse to focus outward and minimize collateral damage to the colony. "It's ready," he called out. Lyra staggered, her barrier flickering. "Do it." Jacob slammed his hand on the activation panel. The rig emitted a blinding flash of light, and a wave of energy surged outward, shaking the ground and sending debris flying. The drones and soldiers froze mid-motion before collapsing in a heap of lifeless metal. The cavern fell silent, the only sound the crackling of dying sparks. Jacob rushed to Lyra's side as she collapsed to the ground. "Lyra," he said, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, her glow faint but still present. "Did it work?" Jacob nodded, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "It worked. They're down." Lyra smiled weakly. "Good. Then it was worth it." As the two sat there in the ruins of the cavern, Jacob couldn't help but feel that their fight was far from over. The consortium might be down, but they wouldn't stay down for long. Still, for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, they could win. A new beginning. The cavern lay in silence, the hum of the overloaded rig finally fading into the darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of scorched metal and dust, and faint beams of light filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Jacob knelt beside Lyra, who lay motionless, her glow now barely a flicker. He shook her gently. "Lyra, stay with me," he said, his voice trembling. "We're not done yet." Her eyes fluttered open, and she managed a faint smile. "We did it, Jacob. The consortium's forces are down. For now." "For now," Jacob repeated, his tone grim. He looked around at the destroyed drones and debris, knowing this victory was temporary. The consortium was like a hydra. Cut off one head, and another would grow in its place. But they'll send more. Lyra's expression grew serious, though her voice was weak. "Then we need to prepare. The cages. There are others across the colonies. My people left behind more than weapons. They left knowledge, plans, and allies who might still be out there." Jacob nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about Orion 5 anymore. It was about something much bigger, a fight for freedom against an empire that thought itself unstoppable. "First, we need to get you somewhere safe," he said, helping her to her feet. "You're in no condition to keep fighting." Lyra leaned on him for support, her steps unsteady but determined. "I'll recover. The Luma Veil will heal me. With time. But you're right. We can't stay here. The consortium will send reinforcements, and this colony will be their first target." Jacob frowned, his thoughts racing. The colony's residents had no idea what was coming. If the consortium retaliated, they'd all be caught in the crossfire. "We need to warn the colony," he said. "Evacuate the workers, get them to safety." Lyra nodded. "But they won't listen to us without proof. We need to show them what the consortium is really planning." Jacob's mind went to the encrypted files from the crate, the ones Lyra had brought with her. If they contained evidence of the consortium's plans, it might be enough to convince the colony to act. "The files," he said. "Do they have what we need?" Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "They do. But decoding them will take time. Time we don't have." Jacob stared at her for a moment, then glanced at the destroyed drones around them. A spark of an idea formed in his mind. What if we use their tech? The consortium systems might have the decryption keys we need. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "That's risky. Their systems are heavily encrypted. If we trigger any security measures, they'll know exactly where we are." "Do we have a choice?" Jacob asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Let's do it." A high-stakes gamble. Jacob and Lyra scavenged parts from the destroyed drones, piecing together a makeshift terminal. Lyra worked with careful precision despite her weakened state, her knowledge of both human and alien technology proving invaluable. Jacob assisted her, his own engineering expertise pushing the limits of what he thought was possible. As the terminal powered up, Lyra inserted the encrypted files. Streams of alien code filled the screen, shifting and rearranging as the decryption process began. Jacob watched anxiously, his fingers tapping against his leg. "How long will this take?" he asked. Lyra frowned. "Minutes, if we're lucky. Hours, if the security measures are more advanced." Jacob sighed, glancing toward the cavern entrance. He felt exposed, vulnerable. If the consortium sent another wave of troops, they wouldn't stand a chance. Suddenly, the screen blinked, and a holographic display appeared. The files had been decrypted, revealing detailed plans for the consortium's operations on Orion 5 and beyond. Jacob's eyes widened as he read the data. "They're not just after the Luma Veil," he said, his voice filled with shock. "They're planning to turn this colony into a manufacturing hub for their weapons. They'll strip it bare and leave nothing behind." Lyra's expression darkened. "This is what they do. They consume, destroy, and move on to the next target. But now we have proof. We can expose them." Jacob nodded. "We need to get this to the colony leaders. If they see this, they'll have no choice but to act." Rallying the colony. Sneaking back into the colony was easier than Jacob expected. The EMP had disabled most of the consortium's surveillance systems, and the chaos it caused provided the perfect cover. With Lyra cloaked in a hooded coat to hide her glowing skin, They made their way to the central hub where the colony's leadership resided. Jacob presented the decrypted files to the governor, a no-nonsense woman named Mayor Callan. At first, she was skeptical, dismissing the idea of a conspiracy. But as she reviewed the evidence, her expression shifted to one of horror. This is real," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "They're planning to enslave us, which is why we need to act now," Jacob said. "Evacuate the colony. Arm the workers. We can't let them take this place." Callan hesitated, clearly overwhelmed. "And what about her?" she asked, her gaze falling on Lyra. "What's her role in all this?" Lyra stepped forward, her hood falling back to reveal her glowing eyes. "I'm not your enemy," she said softly. "I'm here to help you fight back." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Callan straightened, her jaw set. "All right, if we're going to do this, we need a plan, and we need it fast." A new alliance. Over the next few hours, the colony came alive with activity. Workers armed themselves with repurposed mining tools, turning the equipment meant for harvesting ore into makeshift weapons. Jacob and Lyra worked tirelessly to integrate the alien technology from the cache into the colony's defenses. Lyra's strength began to return, her glow brightening with each passing moment. She moved with a renewed sense of purpose, rallying the workers and teaching them how to use the modified tech. Jacob watched her in awe, realizing just how much she was willing to sacrifice for people she barely knew. As the first signs of consortium reinforcements appeared on the colony sensors, Jacob and Lyra stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The fight ahead would be brutal, but for the first time, Jacob felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The final choice. When the consortium's ships arrived, the colony was ready. The workers, armed and united, stood their ground, refusing to be cowed by the Empire's might. Jacob and Lyra led the charge, their combined ingenuity and determination proving to be the colony's greatest weapons. In the end, the consortium retreated, their forces decimated and their plans exposed. But the victory came at a cost. The colony was scared, its people forever changed by the battle. Yet, in their unity, they found strength, and in Lyra, they found a symbol of resistance. As the dust settled, Jacob looked at Lyra, a small smile playing on his lips. "So, what's next?" Lyra's glowing eyes met his, filled with determination. "We find the next cache, we find others like us, and we keep fighting." Jacob nodded, his heart swelling with purpose. Together, they had defied the odds, and together, they would forge a new beginning.